Welcome everyone to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something we all struggle with, right? Bad habits. Specifically, we're unpacking a really fascinating framework from the world of behavioral psychology by a guy named Edwin Guthrie. He created this tactical toolkit for unlearning undesirable behaviors. And look, this isn't just dry, abstract theory. It's a highly practical, actionable set of tools that you can literally start using today to dismantle bad habits, whether they're yours or somebody else's.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to ground Guthrie's theories in a situation of pure, universal, ear-piercing pain. You know the exact pain I'm talking about. Picture it. You're at the grocery store. You've survived all the aisles, and you finally make it to the checkout. And then the meltdown begins. So how do you actually hack a 3-year-old's grocery store checkout tantrum? It is kind of the ultimate test of behavioral management, isn't it?
To really bring this to life throughout this explainer, we whipped up a neat little AI cartoon case study for you. Meet Leo. He's an energetic little 3 to 5-year-old boy. Now, Leo is perfectly well-behaved until he faces his absolute arch nemesis, that brightly colored, perfectly positioned grocery store checkout candy display. Leo is our main protagonist today, and we're going to use Guthrie's toolkit to cure his checkout meltdowns once and for all.
So here is our tactical mission briefing to solve Leo's tantrums, recovering 1. The candy aisle meltdown. 2. Method 1. Fatigue. 3. Method 2. The threshold. 4. Method 3. Incompatible stimuli. And finally, 5. Mastering the toolkit.
Section 1. The candy aisle meltdown. The core context. In behavioral psychology, it basically all comes down to a trigger and a response. For Leo, the trigger is simply reaching that checkout aisle, and the response, a massive, flailing, top-of-his-lungs, screaming tantrum demanding candy. He's kicking, he's yelling, he's making a huge scene. This is the exact, specific, undesirable response that we absolutely need him to unlearn. We basically have to sever the connection between that checkout lane and that explosive behavior.
Section 2. Method 1. Pure fatigue. Force repetition.
Now, what's really interesting about this first tactic is how intense it is. This intervention requires absolute, total commitment. The fatigue method dictates that you force the repetition of the unwanted response until physical exhaustion or just absolute satiation occurs. You don't try to stop the bad behavior. Actually, scratch that. You lean into it so heavily that it breaks the association entirely. It's all about taking the behavior to its absolute breaking point, so the brain just doesn't find it rewarding anymore.
So, what does this actually look like for our guy Leo? Well, instead of giving in at the store or dragging him away crying, you do the exact opposite. You buy a massive bulk bag of the exact candy he was throwing a tantrum over. You bring him home, sit him down at the kitchen table, and you tell him he must continuously unwrap and eat piece after piece, no stopping allowed. By forcing this behavior to physical exhaustion and absolute sugar overload, you completely destroy the novelty. You ruin the rewarding drive of the candy. The tantrum-triggering response is essentially short-circuited because he is literally just sick of it.
Let's pivot to Section 3. Method 2. The threshold, slow desensitization.
Let's see how this builds, because this is a totally different vibe. In stark contrast to the fatigue method, the threshold method is all about slow, incremental desensitization. You introduce a remarkably mild version of the trigger stimulus, so mild that it barely registers and definitely doesn't provoke the tantrum. Then, you very slowly crank up the intensity over time. It's kind of like a volume dial. You are patiently building up the subject's tolerance, step by step, until the full original stimulus is entirely tolerated without that bad response ever happening.
Applying this to Leo's checkout tantrums requires a lot of patience across multiple grocery trips. Step 1. You want past the candy aisle, but from a considerable distance. He can barely see the candy boxes, so, he stays calm. Step 2. Maybe on your next trip, you increase the threshold slightly by walking past the outer edge of the aisle, getting closer. Finally, Step 3. After building up that tolerance over a few weeks, you stand right next to the display. But this time, you haven't practiced deep breathing or maybe use a distraction technique. By stepping up the threshold level by level in these tiny, manageable increments, Leo actually learns to tolerate the trigger without melting down.
All right, Section 4. Method 3. Incompatible stimuli, action constraints.
This brings us to the most punchy, physical intervention in the whole toolkit. This method is completely reliant on action constraints. You manipulate the situation by placing the subject in an environment where it is physically impossible to exhibit the undesirable response when the trigger happens. Think about it. If the body physically cannot perform the action, the behavior simply cannot happen. You completely eliminate the possibility of the tantrum just by changing the physical constraints of the moment.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept. Think about the contrast here. If Leo approaches the checkout with empty hands, well, he's perfectly free to drop to the floor and throw a massive flailing tantrum. But we change the physical environment right as we approach that candy display, the outcome changes completely. We give Leo a heavy gallon of milk to hold with both hands, or, we put him in one of those specialized cards where he's strapped securely facing backward. Because his hands are fully occupied with heavy groceries, or his body is physically restricted, he literally cannot perform the undesirable response. The physical task is completely incompatible with throwing a tantrum. Pretty clever, right?
Finally, Section 5, Mastering the Toolkit, Everyday Application. So the crucial point is this. Now that we've seen these tactics play out with little Leo, Edwin Guthrie has basically given us 3 distinct levers we can pull when we're faced with unwanted behavior. You can push the behavior all the way to physical exhaustion and satiation using the fatigue method, or you can patiently desensitize the subject in tiny, manageable increments using the threshold method. Or, third option, you can engineer the environment to create physical constraints using incompatible stimuli. Understanding these triggers and interventions gives you the absolute power to unlearn any undesirable behavior. And yeah, that goes way, way beyond just a toddler's grocery store meltdowns.
Which leads us with a final thought I want you to take with you today. We focused on little Leo, but these psychological principles apply to literally all of us. I want you to think about your own daily routines, your own automatic reactions. Which of your own bad habits are you going to systematically unlearn using Guthrie's tactical toolkit today? Whether it's mindless scrolling on your phone, stress eating, or procrastinating, you now have the exact blueprint to break the association. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to unpack the fascinating frameworks that shape our world.